I want to show you my game, David. So we're just trying to do a stealth action game on iOS.
Yeah, characters look good.
It's getting there. So basically we're just trying to build like a Resident Evil 1 type of game on iOS where players are playing as the hacker and then they're trying to help Hope, this character kind of trapped in this kind of totalitarian nation.
That looks great.
So it's getting there, but we got a lot of work to do.
Very, very impressive. So what are we talking about?
Beyond. And so I'm a fan of your games.
Okay.
So I guess I'll start with that. And then we'll see where the conversation goes. Okay. I played Heavy Rain back in 2010, and it was my favorite game that year. And what I thought was really interesting about it was just your devotion towards just narrative and games and not wanting to give up, I guess. Just the other day, a writer that I really respect, his name is John Walker. He writes for Rock, Paper, Shotgun. And he wrote a very, very cogent, very thoughtful article about how, as an industry, maybe we should give up or stop trying to pursue storytelling in games. And the examples he's giving are fantastic, and he's got a lot of good arguments to support his thesis. But for me, as a game creator, and you as a game creator, I think we're both in love with the idea of telling stories through games. And we're obviously going to talk about Beyond Two Souls, but I was kind of curious, maybe as a jumping off point, to maybe talk about that, and also in the context of the game that you're making, what's motivating you, and what do you think about that whole theory about storytelling in games is tough. Should we give up or should we keep going?
Well, whatever you create, whether you're a painter or a filmmaker or a writer or a game maker, you want to trigger emotions. And there are many ways of achieving this, but there is one very efficient way for 2,000 years, and it's called storytelling. When you look at the figures, only 25% of the people see the end of the game that they bought. If you take Heavy Rain, it's 75%.
Right. It's awesome.
And why is that? Just because this is the power of storytelling. People want to see what's going to happen next. And only storytelling can achieve this.
I was playing Beyond earlier today, and what struck me is how, both in a good and bad way, it's a very different type of game. The way that your team designs games, my interpretation of it, and I've always wanted to ask you this, was, especially when it comes to the controller, are you designing the game as I try to design the games that we're working on to reach as broad of audience as possible? I noticed that when I'm moving Ellen Page or Jody around the world, that oftentimes the camera's being taken care of for me. Because I've found, at least in my experience, trying to ship a dual analog game in Japan and being at Tokyo Game Show 2007 and watching with horror as the Japanese gamers are only using the left thumbstick. They're never touching the right. I always thought, for us to make Metal Gear broader, we would have to either support a very intelligent camera or go 2D or something like that, So I was curious, when you're designing the controls and the interactions of your game, are you thinking about that where, hey, let's try to make this as hardcore as possible, try to make it as brawny as possible so you can get the 75% of people to play and finish Beyond?
I want as many people to experience my game, and this is not a commercial thing. It's not to sell as many copies as I can. It's just because when you tell a story, you want everybody to hear it and to enjoy it and to interact with it. But for me, in the design process, there are two phases. The first one is really writing the story, imagining the situations and the emotions that I want to trigger, and what role I want the player to play in this thing. So that's the what. And then comes the how. And I never think about two things together, because which button you press is a different job than writing something emotional. So I think about storytelling and interactivity at the same time, like what is the place of the player in the scene I just wrote. But at the same time, which button is going to press is a second phase, and you need to see your scene on screen and to really decide what is the best way to play it. So it's slightly a different approach. I want to reach a wider audience. I don't want the controls to come in the way, to get in the way of the storytelling. I want people to forget that this is just a video game. I want them to be immersed. I want them to be with Jodie Holmes and to be in the scene and just to care for her and what they're going to do and what choices they are going to make. And not struggle with the camera, not struggle with the buttons, because it's not important. It's not what matters at the end of the day. I don't make games based on skills, where the most important thing is to be as fast as you can with your thumb, because I don't care. And I think there's a lot of people out there who don't care. There are people for who it's very important to show that they have skills and that they can compete with their friends. But about the games I make, I don't think it's really important, because I make games based on journey. and not on challenges.
I think that's maybe why my Ben here brought us two together, because you on a much larger scale, but for me, I've had my own share of like controversy in the past year, of coming from Metal Gear and then Halo to iOS, and one of my biggest motivations was to reach to a broader audience. And again, it wasn't for sales necessarily. It's just because I have a story I want to tell, right? I want to do that to as many people. I want to express it to as many people as possible. And there was a lot of angst from some hardcore players because they like the 17-button experience with two analog sticks. That's a testament of skill, as well as they enjoy part of the story. And again, when I'm playing your game, I noticed that like almost feels like any other game director would look at a scene like the Somalia demo that you have on stage here, and Jody is in cover, and there's a guard or there's an enemy coming around the corner, and instead of hold left trigger and then aim with reticle with the left stick and then shoot with R1, it's simply just R1, right? And it's if you press R1, you take down the guy, right? There's no kind of mini game of like a shooting mini game or anything like that. And it's just really interesting that I think you're one of the only people in the world that think about, if I'm going to shoot a guy in a game, it's going to be that simple.
But because I'm not making a shooting game,
right?
It's not a shooter.
But you're doing cover. You're doing like the game from the outside almost looks like it, in a way, the beginning of MGS4. You're in the Middle East, and
you know what?
It's really interesting.
A part of the challenge we gave ourselves on Beyond was to lure players. Come for what you think it is, and it looks so familiar, and you say, oh, I know what I'm gonna get. I'm gonna hide and kill people in their back and do this kind of stuff. And once you're here, discover that was not what the game was about. Because if you just take the scene Somalia, it's not about hiding and stealth and stuff. It's about the relationship with the kid, your role in the scene, and how this relationship turns bad because of you.
Do you look at a scene like, again, there's like stealth elements to it, there's like shooting elements to it, just for this one part of the game, right? And I know your game I've seen enough to know that there's a ton of stuff going on. But do you get inspired by like, wow, I see like a game like Metal Gear or whatever, Splinter Cell, like, and I'd like to do my own take. I want to do the David Cage or the Quantic Dream approach to this kind of scene.
Not really, because I'm driven by the story. If the story leads me to a moment where, oh, she needs to hide and do this kind of things, okay, let's do it. Even if it only happens once in the entire game, which is the case with Somalia. It's the only scene like this. There is no other mission like this. There is no moment where you're at war or whatever. It's the only moment like this.
And I want you to push back if I'm diving too deep into anything.
Sure.
But again, I think what's really interesting, like how many games a year do you finish? Like, because again, I think you approach game paradigms like stuff like stealth action or whatever in a very different way than anybody else, right? Like, are you more inspired by film? Or are you more inspired by just books you read? Because sometimes I feel like when I'm finishing 20 games a year, I can't help but look at how I'm going to solve these problems by just going back to the things I just played, a week ago when I was playing Borderlands or BioShock or something like that. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Is that, are you like, playing games every night when you go home and checking everything out there? Are you kind of in your own world? Because I feel like in a good way you are.
I play less and less, to be honest with you, and when I look around me, I realize that old people, when they pass their 30s, they stop playing because they lose interest. And you have little time for little entertainment time when you have a job, you have a family, you have kids. And usually you are looking for entertainment forms where you get the feeling that you got a better reward for your time. And games sometimes can be very frustrating. They can be really more of the same. They can really be like, oh, I'm shooting at people in corridors for hours and hours and hours. And you know what, when you have just 1 hour and you go back home after work, maybe you want to do something more interesting. And I think it's really a matter of age. I have sons and they love playing games and they really enjoy it and they can shoot at people for hours and they think it's really fun. But when you get older, you lose interest for that and you're looking for something more rewarding in a way. So I spend more time reading, I spend more time watching films or TV series because I think it's more rewarding. That's it. But my hope, and maybe this is why I'm doing this kind of games, is to create games that can be appealing not only to a wider audience, but also to maybe an older audience.
I see.
People who want an intellectual challenge, not a challenge with their thumbs. They want to leave something. They want a journey. They just don't want to be stuck with silly, puzzles or incredibly difficult, enemies. They just want to move on and leave something. And my biggest hope is that by the time they finish my games, they have the feeling that they leave something. It's not just, I spent some time, no, what's next? It's really like, when you think of the best films you've seen or the best books you've read, they left something in you. They changed you even a little bit. Why not games? I mean, games could achieve the same things, and some do. I wish there were more that you would remember and that would change you even a little bit.
At our studio, we're outside at 3 o'clock every afternoon, we play hacky sack. We get in a corner and then start playing hacky sack. And one of the artists, his name is Ben, and he just finished Heavy Rain just recently, like about a month ago. And he said, I love it and I hate it. And I'm sure you hear that all the time. And for me, as I said at the beginning, like that was my favorite game of that year. And I love to ask people what they think of that game because I think it's in a very good way. I think it's very divisive. Was hearing a lot, some of his complaints and some of the other people in the studio's complaints about the title. Granted, they finished it; they're one of the 75%, and I think that's a testimony to like how good that game is and how engrossing it can be. But when you go on forums and things like that, people bring up a lot of the same kind of critiques, right? And when I play Beyond, I see your genre, the type of game that you make, it's an evolution of it, and it's in many ways it's a lot better than your previous title, but it's by no means going to silence all of the hardcore gamer critics out there who want to be able to move the shooting reticle, right? And who want to be able to move out of the sandbox and do whatever they want to, right? And kind of break the narrative in ways and not just kind of play within the space that you've created for them. I'm curious, like when you're designing Beyond and what you do moving forward, is like how much of that voice is in your mind when you're writing and when you're directing these games, in terms of that very strong, very affluent, very intelligent minority of hardcore gamers, and like how much does that affect you? Because it affects me quite a bit because I'm on the forums all the time.
Thing is that if you go on forums and expect these people to tell you what you should do, then you're doing marketing and you're making products. And I respect that, but that's not what I want to do with my life. I want to do what I believe in. I want to trust my instinct, and if I'm right, great. If I'm wrong, too bad, but at least I will fail based on my ideas and not based on forums. There's something I strongly believe in also, is that people don't really know what they want. And it's good to listen, and it's good to ignore. You need to be able to do both. But there is this famous quote from Henry Ford about the faster horse. And that's really exactly how I feel. I mean, yeah, okay, I'll listen. You want maybe sandboxes, and you want a gun, and maybe you want to shoot at people. You know what? There are tons of games doing this very well out there. I don't need to add one more. I mean, look at the show here at E3. I mean, there are 2,000 games where you can shoot.
Sure, but when you look at a player like me, I'm your worst enemy when it comes to playing Beyond. And I'm sure like the guys that work at Sony, the Sony booth, are just like, oh, here's one of these guys, because I'm failing at some of the actions to see what happens, right? I'm trying to break the game, and I kind of hate myself for it because I just want to be able to enjoy it. But at the same time, I'm very curious, like, to what extent do you support, different failures? When I want to move Jodie out of the sandbox, she just turns around and brings me back into it, right? From your perspective, what I'm assuming, and I was kind of curious if this is the truth, is that you don't want to. The player has a role, and they are playing as Jodie and what Jodie should be doing in these situations, and you're not creating a world that is like with infinite possibilities. You want to create like a stage, and there's different props, and is that the way you would think about it? Because that's the way I'm interpreting when I'm playing the game.
When you work on sandboxes, you have an open world and the player can do whatever he wants. I did that. It was called Omikron, the Nomad Soul, and it was a huge city. And I did it, and I realized that there was no way you could really tell a story if you don't have a little bit more control on what's going on. A little bit. If you have an open world, it's great because you got a lot of freedom and you can do whatever you want and even be bored. But it's not up to the player to be alone to tell the story and say, okay, I give you a world, just do whatever you want and it's going to be a great experience, because this is why only 25% of the people finish games. It's by at some point you lose interest.
Because you think it's because these games are too hard?
It's because sometimes they're too hard. They are really based on challenges and ramping. The fact that you want to hurt yourself in a way, like it's becoming harder and harder and harder. And yeah, I'm struggling, but I want to be better than the game and beat the game. Some people love that, and again, I respect that. But at the same time, some people don't see the interest of that. I don't want to compete with other players. I don't pretend I'm better than anyone at playing this game or this game. I just want the best value for my entertainment time. So give me a story I can enjoy, give me a ride, give me a journey. That's what I'm interested in. But if you give me just a series of obstacles that are becoming harder and harder, I'm not interested in that. And that's my personal taste, and again, I'm not saying it's a bad thing.
No, that's why I think this is a beautiful thing, right? It's like that you're able to make these types of games that are very different. And that, so going back to my employee Ben, that's what his number one thing that he liked about Heavy Rain is, like, it's unlike any other game I played on my PlayStation, and I think that's a really good thing.
Yeah, definitely. But we don't have the feeling we do anything special, to be honest with you. We just tell stories where we collaborate with the player to tell it. That's all we do. And yes, there are some constraints, and yes, the characters cannot do anything, and no, our characters don't have a gun and they can't kill everybody. But what's so special about that? We do nothing special, we just tell stories. Mm-hmm. We just don't use mechanics because we don't really like them. Because life is not about mechanics, it's not about having a set of 10 animations and each time you press a button, the same thing happens. It's about contextual interactions, it's about dialogues, it's about turning on or off the light, it's about tiny things, it's about how we are going to interact together. It's about all these things. And why limiting interacting to shooting? Why? Or jumping? Why? What's the reason for that? And why is it called, this is called a game, a video game,
right.
and that's okay.
Right.
That's good for hardcore gamers, that's rational, and that's a good video game. But if you do something where you don't shoot, you don't kill anyone, you don't jump on platforms, you just make choices, you interact with the story, oh, that's not really a video game. No, it's not true. It's not true.
No, I totally agree. I don't think what you're making is not a video game, and actually, who cares if it's not or whatever,
exactly.
Right? And I think that's basically the way, I feel like that's the way you approach things. For me, I don't know if it's my background or just, but I feel this deep desire, for better or for worse, to make a watertight sandbox, if you will, for lack of a better term. Our game is not super sandboxy, but I want all of the NPCs to be on proper patrols, right? I want them to be consistent about what items they're carrying. I want players to be able to scan these guards and see what items they're carrying, and then think strategically about, do I want to steal from this guard, do I want to steal from this guard? But I also want to tell a story, right? And oftentimes these mechanics can get in the way. But I'm also very, very much disinterested in games with shooting anymore, and that's why in our game there's no killing.
You get older.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm only 31 now, so
yeah,
maybe
that's the beginning.
It's the beginning.
First
of the end.
sign, you're changing.
But it really actually started in '98 when I played Metal Gear Solid 1, and the game rewarded me for not killing anybody. That's when everything changed for me, and so I've always been an old man since I think the very beginning.
But that's a good point. But the thing is that I think it doesn't really work mechanics with storytelling, because if you make mechanics where, let's say, you have a gun and you need to shoot at people, very standard mechanics, you will need to turn your story and twist it in a way to justify that you will have tons and tons of people coming at you and that you shoot them, and that's okay. So you move to the next level where you have more people coming to you that you'll need to shoot. But what kind of story is that?
It's a story, in my opinion, about shooting people, because I think if the narrative design discipline of the past 5 years has taught us anything, and if it's correct, it's that your story needs to be completely aligned with what your mechanics are. And so that was a thing that I really struggled with on Halo. I'm trying to write the story for Halo 4, and I want to tell the story about Cortana, but I'm looking at what the player's doing, and Master Chief is doing 85% of the time, and that's shooting aliens. And so everything in my soul is telling me to do is to write a story about killing aliens, because that's what the player's doing all the time. And I think that you often see that a lot of games getting in trouble because they have these mechanics to try to support the game and have you have a 15-hour experience, right? But they want to tell this beautiful story about this character and their wife and kids or something like that, right? And I think that's what a lot of people get in trouble with, right? And I think that's what you're trying to avoid, and that's what mechanics you feel like mechanics are getting in the way of the story you're trying to tell. If I'm understanding
I'm saying if you use the same mechanics for 10 hours, I mean, there's no story that can justify that. It's extremely difficult. And even if you will write a story of a soldier at war, where you can understand, okay, there are tons of people coming at me and I need to shoot them. But, I mean, there are many movies about war, but they are not about the guy shooting at people for 90 minutes. They are about how difficult war can be and the pain and the people behind this. And you know, one of my favorite war films is Apocalypse Now.
Yeah.
But it's not really about war.
There's not a lot of action in that film, that's for sure.
And I'm dreaming of saying Halo maybe one day, where you don't really shoot, I mean, where you have a story.
It's funny, I've noticed in this past 6 months, so many of my friends who work in the industry saying, you know, I would like that game if there was less shooting, or Tomb Raider, for example, if it less shooting, and like, hey, I'm trying to figure out a way to do this game with less shooting. I feel like there is something of a sea change happening. It's gonna be really tough though. But
I think that some people in the industries, including you and me, we're getting older, and I meet many game designers having the same thoughts, and they are older, and they've done and played so many games based on the same mechanics that they reach a point where they say, oh, well, okay, we've done it, we enjoyed it. What else? What's next? How can we do things differently? How can we do something maybe more meaningful?
I'm assuming you've played Shenmue?
Yeah.
Would you mind if I ask you two a question or two?
No, sure.
Suzuki-san. 本当？あ、もしもし、セム3とか、あとなんか罰の話なんかあったらさ。He basically said he's tired of being asked about Shemue 3.
I'm sorry we made you wait.
No, this is a very impromptu thing. So just turned out that we were going to hang out and have lunch, and I said, hey, do you want to come early and meet David? And I thought, well, this is a perfect moment, or a perfect opportunity, because when I play your games, I'm oftentimes thinking about me playing his games back in 2000, 2001, 2003.
It's really funny because at the time of Shenmue, I was working on Indigo Prophecy. And when Shenmue was released, I thought that we followed the same process, the same thinking. We found different solutions, but I thought that we were looking for the same thing, is to tell an interactive story.
Storytelling and being able to express the story was a big thing, but it was also the thing that really consumed him was trying to figure out how to make a game that was 60 hours or 100 hours, where lots of things are going on, but that he's able to tell the story through multiple mediums. Is that the way that you? I imagine you approach you're not thinking about how to entertain people for 100 hours.
No, I mean, no one wants to be entertained for so long. That's way too long.
I don't know. I played Dark Souls for about 200, so.
No, but it becomes a pain. But no, I think
lots of pain in that game.
Yeah, I think 8 to 10 hours is a good length. My gut feeling with Shenmue, and maybe I'm wrong, but I thought it was trying to tell a story. It was one of the first ones to use QTEs. He invented them pretty much. And I thought it was a very interesting way, because it was about using contextual actions, rather having a generic mechanic to do very different things, so the game would become more fluid. And I thought it was a very, very clever decision to make.
Yeah, as you know, like Yu Suzuki comes from a background of arcade games, and he was first thinking about games that require timing and very kind of simple actions, but that players can play over the course of not 60 hours but 60 seconds, right? And then when he started thinking about Shenmue and knowing that this is going to be more of a, as he puts it, like a consumer-focused game, more of like, I guess you could say, a console, like a kind of a couch gameplay. The idea was to take something that's not as difficult, not as punishing as an arcade game, and then to kind of loosen up the time a little bit and allow players to make mistakes, but then the next QT that comes up is a little easier, and then it's a little bit easier, and it's a little bit easier, to try to allow them to kind of have that action, have that kind of thrill, but not be so punishing as like an arcade game. And then the idea was to mix them in with the cinematics to try to make it a lot more, more thrilling and things like that. So I thought I never thought about it from the perspective of the arcade
Yeah.
you know.
I think it's
history.
funny because what you describe is really more thinking about the game like a journey than like a challenge.
Right.
And I think this is definitely something we have in common.
冒険、
Oh.
そうそう
Yes. Yeah, an adventure, he put it, yeah.
But it's funny because I was really designing Fahrenheit at the time Shenmue was released, so it was really parallel
Yeah, it was.
routes in
Yeah.
many ways, and that's interesting. And I think I'm a big admirer of Japanese designers, and because I think they try to do things differently, and sometimes it's maybe too different for me. But I'm a big fan of you, but I'm also a big fan of Ueda-san and many Japanese designers. They just think differently, and especially when you come to E3, you really enjoy people thinking differently.
Yes.
Because okay, some fresh air and exploring different ways, different routes, and that's good. This is what the industry needs.
I actually, maybe I'll flip it over and ask you a question, or maybe both of you guys a question. But I'm curious if Suzuki Yu knows about all this. But I feel like no matter how long Shenmue's been around, and no matter how long QTEs have been around, and how many great games like, you know, Heavy Rain or God of War they're in, they get a little bit of a bad rap. I'm kind of curious, like, what your take is on it, and then I'll explain and maybe see if he has any other kind of
QTEs?
yeah.
QTEs is a very strange thing because it's.
Why is it so divisive? You know, why is it so?
It is especially for people. Well, it really depends what you expect from your game experience. Again, some people want to show their skills, and this system is not really about skills. So they feel frustrated because they feel like it's not really a video game because it's too simple for them. But other people say, well, I don't want to show my skills, I just want to leave something and experience something. And if the system works, and if it's enjoyable, and if I can understand it and I can play it, it's not in the way, fair enough. And it's really interesting because on Heavy Rain we got very negative feedback about QTEs, especially from people who didn't play the game.
Right.
They thought, this is not really a video game, I don't want to play this. And it was really brutal and really like, that's crap. And people who played the game just enjoyed them. They thought it was pleasant, it was easy, it was what they expected, and it fit very well in the game, I think. So it's I don't know why it's so difficult to get people to understand that, but fair enough. I mean,
最初はやっぱり普通のタイミングゲームやってる人は簡単すぎるから
ああ
面白くないっていう人もいるけど、やっぱりライトユーザーはいいんじゃないかな。
So he basically said the same thing you did, where I'm not going to bother translating everything you said, because he basically said the same thing. He said, I asked about in Japan, were QTEs pretty controversial when Shenmue came out? And he said, yeah, it was a little bit controversial with the hardcore users that found that it was too easy. And then for the light users, they were able to get into the game, they really liked it. So it's
the real question they ask is, does a game have to be difficult to be enjoyable? I mean, does it have to be difficult?
So from Yu's perspective, he thinks that difficulty or challenge is important for any type of game, but it just depends on what type of game you're making. It's like in a puzzle game, you don't want it to be. I'm putting words in his mouth now, but like you don't want it to be just the puzzles like right there in front of you. You want to have a challenge, and he said in Shenmue what they did was they oftentimes looked at. They said they want to keep it a simple timing puzzle experience, and they would look at how many times players were missing different cues. And then from there, they would actually make the game easier. And so, and also I think in Kakuto no Buben mo so dattakke? And I didn't know this, but in their fighting, like their virtual fighter type of like two one-on-one fighting sections too, if you're getting hit a lot, they actually made the game easier, which I didn't know. I thought I was winning all that time, but maybe maybe the system was actually helping me.
相手の隙が多くなってくる。
そうだね。
バンバンってやって、バンと打ってくださいってちょっと待って。だんだんこう
He says, yeah, and oftentimes they would get into that mode of just like, come, okay, now hit me now. It's time for the player to feel better. So.
プレイヤーは自分が強くなって勝ったとプレイヤーは思う。
そうだね。It's so yeah, he really wants the player to feel like it's them when they finally, deliver the final blow and take out the character and take out the guy. And I don't know, do you feel like there's those elements still in Beyond? I mean, the thing I respect you most is I feel like you flip over the table on pretty much everything that has to do with video game, like, history in both the good and bad ways. But I feel like you still have elements of, traditional game design in the games. Like, you want players to feel good after like a kind of a difficult section of the game. Or maybe you don't.
No, I don't.
I can never assume anything about you.
I want them to feel something, good or bad, or miserable, or sad, or as long as you feel something when you play, good. I mean, we reached our goal. The last thing you want is someone to be totally indifferent to what's going on. Say, well, I don't care. Then you lose the player.
Mm-hmm.
But no, I mean, you can be defeated in an action scene and still feel something interesting for the game.
In your heart, like, what's your goal, or what's your measurement for success when you're thinking about this title? Like, what are you trying to achieve?
What I try to achieve is to create a very strong sense of empathy for the main character, for Jodie. Because the game is the story of her life, and you will know her since she was 8. Be with her when she was this angry teenager, and be with her again when she's this young adult. And you'll be with her in the happy times and difficult times in her life. And what I'm looking for is that by the time you complete the game and you turn off your console, you have the feeling that you lost someone really close, someone you knew by heart, and that I want you to miss her in a way.
ゲームしてない間も思い出すとか、やっぱりそういうのは必要。
He was saying that is also for Shenmue, that was one of his goals, is that he wanted, when you turn off the game, that you're still thinking about the world and thinking about Ryo. So on Shenmue, he was saying that, unlike a film where you have 2 or 3 hours of just something that's really compact, you know exactly what line's going to play it here, you know that for the most part, your viewer is going to experience the whole thing in one sitting. With Shenmue, he had to think about kind of separating in different chapters and different play sessions, so it continues with the player, even though they might put it down for a day and they're playing it over the course of 2 weeks. And I think that definitely resonated with me. I was definitely thinking about Shenmue as I went out throughout the day, and I'm just kind of curious if that's something that you thought about in with Beyond, because you're not, oftentimes people are like, they used to say the same thing about my old boss, like, why don't you just go make a movie? Well, first of all, it's going to be a pretty damn long movie, but it's also, it's a different kind of experience. I'm curious if that's what are you thinking about in terms of different play times and different sittings, or is it just one big epic, like you're watching Lord of the Rings trilogy for 10 hours straight,
No. I think about this, but my games are usually split in scenes, and each scene usually is a story within the story. So you can just play one scene and have a satisfying experience with a sense of closure, and stop playing and then come back and move to the next scene. And it was pretty much the case with the Heavy Rain, where the scenes were shorter. I think the scenes were about 20 minutes long. Here on Beyond, we have some scenes that are maybe 45 minutes long. But same thing, there are one story within the story, because I like this kind of procedural thing where you have a story arc at the size with the length of the story, but at the same time, each scene has its own story arc. And sometimes within a scene, you have a story arc within the story arc within the story arc.
And so that was intentional because of the different players' playtime, is what you're thinking?
No.
Or is this the way you wrote it?
It's just the way I thought it worked, because it's also the kind of length that you may find in films. So people are used to have stories that are maximum 40 to 45 minutes and not 10 hours long. Right. So that was something important, but it was very natural and easy to do. It was not like, oh, I need to do this when that's not a request. Right.
Well, this is very fun. I appreciate it's a very unusual type of press sort of thing, but I really thank you so much for doing this kind of fun thing.
Oh, thank you. It was a pleasure to meet you in person.
I was really excited to be able to bring you two together. The two worlds collide to see what happens.
It's not really a collusion.
朝ちょっとバーッと回って、僕やっぱり気になるゲーム写真撮ってたんだよ。
He said that this morning he went around the E3 conference and he's like he just took pictures of anything that caught his attention, and so so yeah, exactly. So the proof's there. This is not just very good. Yeah.
でもビヨンドで日本帰ってから調べれば出てくると思って忘れないように。
He says like he's really excited about the game. When he goes back to Japan, he's going to look up as much as he can. So
thanks. Hey, I will come to Tokyo for TGS. I mean,
Tokyo TGS の時に来日するからもしなんか
出会う an opportunity to meet. I'd love to see you there.
なんか食べましょう。
He would love to eat something together if you have time.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. And if you're in Paris anytime,
なんか
please
パ
let
リ
me
に
know.
行くときにぜひ呼んでください。
パリに行くの？
そうそう。So he's very very excited about the fact that you're a Parisian company. So. Thanks again, David.
Thank you. Thank you very much.